The silver veil of the Ethelgard border didn't just shimmer. It hummed with the threat of agonizing death. For 3,000 years, the law had been etched into the very marrow of the Fae. To step into the realm of iron and mortality is to forfeit your soul to the ash. Prince Elio Corleone stood at the precipice of that shimmering divide, his lungs burning, his pulse a frantic drum against his ribs. The air of the Fae realm was stagnant, heavy with the scent of ancient moss and eternal starlight. But tonight, a rogue wind had torn through the barrier. It carried a scent that shouldn't exist. A fragrance of crushed jasmine, rain-slicked earth, and a searing golden warmth that felt like a physical hand pressing against his heart. It was the scent of her. It was a scent that tasted of forbidden sunlight and a hunger he hadn't known he possessed. If he stayed, he remained a prince of a dying, frozen perfection. If he crossed, he was a traitor marked for ruin. The scent flared again, sharper this time, laced with a note of sudden, sharp terror. Elio didn't think. He didn't pray to the old gods. He lunged forward, his body screaming as the veil tore against his skin like 1,000 jagged diamonds. Hello, my wonderful friends and story seekers. It is so good to have you here with me today. Before we dive deeper into the shadows of this forbidden world, I'd love to know where you're joining us from today. Drop your country or city in the comments below. I love seeing how far our community reaches. How are you all doing? I hope you're ready for a journey that will test the limits of fate itself. If you haven't already, please do hit that subscribe button and join our family. Your support is the magic that keeps these stories alive, and you won't want to miss what happens when the worlds finally collide. The transition was a violent shattering of the senses. Elio hit the ground of the human realm, not on soft grass, but on hard, unforgiving asphalt that reeked of chemicals and decay. The sensory assault of the mortal world was a physical blow. The roar of distant engines, the flickering hum of artificial orange lights, and the heavy, humid air of a summer night in a city that never slept. His Fae ears, sensitive enough to hear the growth of a leaf, bled from the cacophony. But through the smog and the noise the scent remained. It was closer now. He scrambled to his feet, his regal tunic of woven moonlight looking like a tattered costume in the harsh glare of a street lamp. He was in an alleyway, the brick walls closing in on him like the bars of a cage. The fragrance, the jasmine and the rain, was coming from just around the corner, but it was being drowned out by something foul, the metallic tang of blood and the sour stench of predatory intent. Elio rounded the corner, his vision blurring as his magic struggled to stabilize in a world devoid of ambient mana. There, pinned against a rusted chain-link fence, was the source. She was smaller than the Fae women, her skin glowing with a terrifyingly fragile vitality. Her hair was a dark mahogany, tangled and damp with sweat. Her eyes, wide amber and filled with a fierce, trembling defiance, locked onto his. This was Clarice Sullivan, though he did not yet know her name. He only knew that her soul smelled like the dawn he had been denied for a millennium. Standing over her were 3 men, their faces obscured by the shadows of their hoodies, their hands gripping jagged pieces of broken glass and a heavy iron pipe. To a Fae, iron was more than a metal. It was a poison, a soul killer. The mere proximity of the pipe made Elio's skin blister and hiss. "Look at this one," one of the men sneered, turning his gaze toward Elio. "What are you supposed to be, some kind of circus freak? Get lost, pretty boy, before we decide your clothes are worth more than your life." Clarice's gaze darted from the attackers to Elio. "Run," she gasped, her voice a jagged shard of silk. "There's more of them coming. Just run." Elio felt the curse of the veil beginning to settle into his bones. A cold, creeping ash that threatened to turn his heart to gray stone. He was losing his strength. His immortality was leaking out into the thirsty pavement. But as he looked at the woman, he saw a flicker of gold behind her pupils. A spark of the ancient magic that had been stolen from his world eons ago. She didn't just smell like the Fae, she carried the Fae's lost light within her mortal chest. One of the men lunged at Clarice, his hand reaching for the satchel she held tight against her ribs. "No!" Elio roared. He stepped forward, the iron pipe swinging toward his head. In that split second, as the cold metal whistled through the air, Elio realized this wasn't just a rescue mission. The scent hadn't been a beckoning. It was a warning. If he died here, the bridge between worlds would collapse forever. If he lived, he would be hunted by his own kind and the monsters of this realm alike. The pipe connected with his shoulder with a sickening crack of bone. Elio collapsed to one knee, the world spinning into a kaleidoscope of gray and amber. He looked up, his hand reaching out toward Clarice, his fingers inches from her worn leather boots. Who are you? He thought, his consciousness flickering. And why does the entire fate of Ethelgard feel like it's buried in your heartbeat? As the attackers closed in, a low, guttural growl echoed from the shadows of the alley, a sound that didn't belong to the human world nor the Fae. Something else had followed him through the veil. Something that had been waiting for the prince to break the law. The darkness of the alley didn't just swallow the light, it seemed to breathe. As Elio knelt on the cold, oil-stained pavement, the agony in his shoulder was a secondary concern to the sheer, overwhelming presence of the woman standing before him. Up close, Clarice Sullivan was a walking contradiction. To any mortal eye, she was a struggling student or a weary waitress, clad in a faded denim jacket and boots that had seen too many miles. But to Elio's Fae senses, she was a supernova. The gold in her eyes wasn't just a trick of the flickering street lamps. It was a resonance, a humming frequency that matched the deepest foundations of his home realm. She was the anchor he hadn't known he was searching for. "Hey," I said, "back off," one of the men shouted, though his voice wavered. The guttural growl from the shadows had chilled the air, turning the humid city night into a tomb. Clarice didn't run. Despite the terror vibrating through her small frame, she stepped toward Elio. She saw his blood, not red like hers, but a shimmering iridescent violet that glowed faintly against the black asphalt. "You're hurt," she whispered, her voice a soothing balm that seemed to slow the spreading poison of the iron pipe's strike. She reached out, her fingers hovering inches from his face. "Who are you? Why did you jump in front of that?" Elio looked up at her, his breath hitching. Even in his weakened state, the urge to protect her was primal, etched into his very DNA by the scent she carried. "I am someone who should not be here," he managed to choke out. The attackers, sensing Elio's vulnerability, regained their courage. The leader, a man with a jagged scar across his nose named Silas Vane, spat on the ground. Silas was a bottom feeder in this city, a man who survived by sniffing out things that were out of place. And Elio, with his pointed ears tucked under silver hair and his glowing blood, was the ultimate anomaly. "I don't care if you're a ghost or a freak," Silas hissed, raising the iron pipe again. "That bag she's holding? It belongs to my employer. And you look like you're made of jewelry. I'm gonna peel those pretty clothes off your carcass." Before Silas could swing, the shadows at the end of the alley solidified. A creature lunged, a hound of the wild hunt. It was a beast of smoke and obsidian teeth, a guardian of the veil sent by Elio's own father, King Oberon Corleone, to drag the wayward prince home or execute him for his transgression. "Look out!" Clarice screamed, lunging forward. She didn't grab Elio. She grabbed the iron pipe from Silas's hand in a blur of motion that shouldn't have been possible for a human. As her skin touched the cold metal, a shock wave of golden light erupted from her palms. The iron didn't just vibrate, it shattered into dust. Silas and his men were thrown back by the sheer force of the kinetic blast, hitting the brick walls with enough force to knock them unconscious instantly. The shadow hound skidded to a halt, its glowing red eyes narrowing. It sniffed the air, confused. It recognized the prince, but the girl, she was an impossibility. She possessed the Sunder, the ancient Fae power to unmake physical matter, a gift lost to the royal bloodline for 5 centuries. Elio stared at her, his heart hammering against his ribs. You are a Sunbringer." Clarice stood there, gasping for air, her hands trembling as the golden glow faded back into her skin. She looked down at the dust that used to be a heavy metal pipe, her face pale with shock. "I don't know what that is," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm just Clarice. I'm just a girl trying to keep her grandmother's shop from being bulldozed. I don't know why things happen when I get scared." She looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time, Elio saw the loneliness etched into her soul. She was a pariah in her own world, a girl who broke things she touched, who felt a constant aching pull toward a horizon she couldn't see. She was an exile just like him. "I'm Elio," he said, his voice softening as he forced himself to stand, clutching his wounded shoulder. The hound hissed, preparing for another spring, but Elio stepped in front of Clarice, shielding her. "And I think I've spent my entire life waiting to find you." "You're crazy," she laughed, a brittle, beautiful sound. You're bleeding purple and there's a giant smoke dog behind you and you're talking like we're in a movie. The smoke dog is a shadow of my world, Elio explained, his eyes never leaving the beast. And it will not stop until I am dead or returned to the silence of the veil. Clarice, if you stay here they will kill you too. They cannot allow your scent, your power, to exist outside of the Ethelgard. Pie shop, she muttered, her mind racing. My grandmother, Mrs. Higgins, she's at the shop. If these things are following you they'll find her. Then we go to her, Elio said firmly. He reached out his hand. It was a moment of profound stakes. If she took it, she was stepping into a war that had lasted longer than human civilization. If she didn't, she would be hunted by Silas's mysterious employers and the Fae King's hounds alike. Clarice looked at his hand, long, elegant fingers shimmering with the residue of magic, and then at his eyes, which held a depth of sincerity and sorrow that made her feel, for the first time in her life, like she wasn't a freak. She was a piece of a puzzle finally being clicked into place. She took his hand. The moment their skin met, the alleyway vanished. Not because they moved, but because the resonance between them created a localized pulse of pure energy. The shadow hound let out a pained yelp as the golden violet light seared its smoky form, forcing it to dissipate back into the ether. They ran. Through the rain-slicked streets of the city, Elio felt the heavy, suffocating weight of the mortal world pressing down on him. Every car horn was a physical blow. Every neon sign felt like a needle in his eyes. But Clarice's hand in his was a tether. She navigated the maze of the Lower East Side with a practiced ease, leading him toward a small ivy-covered storefront tucked between two towering glass skyscrapers. The sign above the door read, "The Alchemist's Hearth." Inside, the air was different. It didn't smell like the city. It smelled of dried lavender, beeswax, and the same jasmine rain scent that had pulled Elio across the stars. An elderly woman sat behind the counter, her eyes clouded with cataracts but sharp with a different kind of sight. This was Eleanor Higgins. She didn't look surprised to see a glowing Fae Prince in her shop. She looked relieved. "You're late, Your Highness," she said, her voice like dry parchment. "I've been brewing the tea for 20 years. It's gone quite cold." Clarice dropped Elio's hand, her mouth agape. "Grandma? You know him." "I know what he represents, child," Eleanor said, gesturing for them to lock the door. "I know that the scent you carry is a beacon. And I know that the prince here is the only thing standing between you and the harvest." "The harvest?" Elio asked, his brow furrowed. "The king has no interest in the human world beyond the preservation of the veil." Eleanor let out a dry, hacking laugh. "Your father, King Oberon, is a liar, Elio. He didn't build the veil to protect the Fae. He built it to hide the fact that he stole the Sunbringer's soul to power his eternal life. And Clarice? She isn't just a human with magic. She is the reincarnation of the queen he betrayed, the woman whose scent gave life to your entire world." The revelation hit Elio like a physical blow. His father, a thief of souls? The very foundation of his loyalty began to crumble. He looked at Clarice, who was backing away, her hands glowing again. "I'm not a queen," she snapped. "I'm a girl who's behind on her rent. I don't want any of this." "It doesn't matter what you want, Clarice," Eleanor said solemnly. "The scent has been released. The Fae court is coming. And they aren't coming to welcome you home. They're coming to put the sun back in its cage." Suddenly, the windows of the shop shattered. Not inward but outward, as if the air itself had been sucked out of the room. Standing in the street was a woman clad in armor made of frozen winter, General Caliph Thorne. "Prince Elio," Calith's voice echoed through the broken glass, cold and sharp. "Step away from the mortal. The king demands the return of his property." Elio drew a hidden blade of pure starlight from his sleeve, his eyes flashing with a newfound defiance. "She is not property, Caliph. And I am no longer a prince of a lie." The air inside the alchemist's hearth turned to liquid nitrogen. General Caliph Thorne didn't just walk through the door. She stepped through the reality of the shop as if it were a fragile veil of cobwebs. Her armor, forged from the ice of the northern spires, hummed with a low-frequency vibration that made the glass jars of dried herbs on the shelves crack and weep. "Elio," Caliph said, her voice a chilling melody. "Your sentimentality was always your greatest flaw. You were sent to the border to guard, not to scavenge among the ruins of humanity." Elio stood his ground, the starlight blade in his hand pulsing a rhythmic, defiant violet. The poison of the iron pipe still burned in his shoulder, but the proximity to Clarice, the Sunbringer, was acting as a catalyst. His magic wasn't just returning, it was evolving. The ruins of humanity hold more truth than the golden halls of Ethelgard, Caliph. I smell the rot in my father's court now. I smell the theft. Clarice moved behind the counter, her hands gripping the wood so hard it began to smolder. Who are these people? She demanded, her voice shaking but her eyes burning. Grandma, we have to call someone. The police, The police cannot help you against the High Court, Clarice, Eleanor Higgins said, her blind eyes fixed unerringly on Caliph. The old woman reached under the counter and pulled out a small, tarnished silver bell. This is about the debt of the ages. Caliph's gaze shifted to Clarice, and for a moment the general's icy composure flickered. She breathed in deeply, her nostrils flaring. The aroma. It is true. The prophecy of the shattered bloom has ripened. She raised a hand, and the shadows in the corners of the shop began to lengthen, twisting into serrated blades of pure darkness. Hand her over, Elio. If you do, I will tell the king you were ensnared by a glamour. You can return to your life. You can be the prince of the morning again. I would rather die in the twilight of this alley than live another hour in a kingdom built on her stolen breath, Elio countered. He didn't wait for Caliph to strike. He lunged. The battle was a blur of impossible physics. Elio moved with the grace of a falling star, his blade clashing against Caliph's ice-forged spear. Each impact sent shockwaves through the shop, sending books flying and shattering the antique furniture. Elio was faster, but Caliph was powered by the very realm he had abandoned. She was an extension of the king's will, and in this mortal realm she was a goddess of destruction. Clarice, run! Elio roared as he parried a strike that would have cleaved him in two. Take the back door. Eleanor, get her out of here. But Clarice Sullivan was done running. She looked at the wreckage of her grandmother's life, the shop that had been their only sanctuary, and something snapped. The fear that had defined her existence, the feeling of being broken or too much, fused with a white-hot protective instinct. Leave him alone. Clarice didn't use a weapon. She simply clapped her hands together. A shock wave of pure, golden radiance erupted from her. It wasn't the flickering light of a candle, it was the roar of a furnace. The gold hit Caliph square in the chest, shattering her ice armor into 1,000 harmless slush flakes and hurling the general through the front window, across the street, and through the brick wall of the bank opposite. The silence that followed was deafening. Elio dropped to his knees, gasping, his starlight blade flickering out. He looked at Clarice. Her hair was floating as if she were underwater, and her skin was etched with glowing veins of liquid gold. Clarice. He whispered, awe and terror warring in his voice. She looked at her hands, which were now smoking. I just wanted her to stop. She will not stop, Eleanor said, her voice urgent. She grabbed a heavy leather-bound book from a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards and shoved it into Clarice's arms. That was just a scouting party. The king will send the host now. He cannot allow the Sunbringer to be awake. If the people of Ethelgard realize their queen has returned, his reign ends. Where do we go? Clarice asked, looking at Elio. She didn't trust the magic and she didn't trust the prophecies, but she trusted the way Elio looked at her, as if she were the only thing that mattered in two different worlds. To the heart of the city, Elio said, standing up with a pained grunt. The iron of the skyscrapers and the salt of the harbor will dampen our trail for a few hours. We need to find the weaver. He's the only one who can mask your scent. Wait, Clarice said, her amber eyes searching his. If I go with you, I'm leaving everything. My life, my shop. Your life ended the moment he smelled you, child, Eleanor said sadly. But a new one begins. One where you aren't a freak. One where you are the light. Suddenly the ground began to tremble. It wasn't an earthquake. It was the sound of 1,000 horses shod in silver, galloping through the sky. The wild hunt had been unleashed. The sky over the city, usually a dull orange from the light pollution, began to turn a bruised, unnatural purple. They're here, Elio said, grabbing Clarice's hand. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through them both, a spark of something deeper than magic. It was the first stirrings of a bond that had been severed centuries ago. We have to go. Now. They sprinted out the back door just as a bolt of violet lightning struck the roof of the alchemist's hearth, blooming into a pillar of fire. Clarice didn't look back. She couldn't. She was focused on the heat of Elio's hand and the impossible scent of jasmine and rain that now seemed to be coming from both of them. As they dived into the labyrinth of the subway tunnels, Clarice pulled Elio into a shadow. "If we're going to survive this," she panted, her face inches from his, "you need to tell me the truth. Why did you really come across? Was it just the smell? Or did you know who I was?" Elio looked at her, his silver eyes reflecting her golden glow. "I didn't know the queen. I didn't know the prophecy. I only knew that for the first time in 300 years I felt like I could breathe. I didn't come for a legend, Clarice. I came for you." In the damp, dark tunnel, amidst the distant roar of trains and the approaching thunder of Fae hooves, the first major twist of their journey revealed itself. Elio reached into his tunic and pulled out a small obsidian locket. "My mother gave this to me before she disappeared," he said, his voice cracking. "She told me to follow the scent of the dawn. She wasn't just a Fae noble, Clarice. She was the one who hid you here. She betrayed the king to save the sun. Your mother is the reason I'm human?" Clarice whispered. "She's the reason you're alive," Elio said. "And she's the reason I'm a traitor. We aren't just running from my father. We're running toward the secret she died to protect." A chilling horn blast echoed through the tunnels. The hunt had found the entrance. Can Elio and Clarice reach the Weaver before the king's shadow consumes them, or will the secrets of the locket tear them apart before they even begin? The subway tunnels were a ribcage of rusted steel and weeping concrete, a far cry from the crystalline elegance of Ethelgard. Elio and Clarice moved through the dark, their footsteps splashing in the shallow, oily water between the tracks. The air here was thick with the smell of ozone and old metal, the very things that acted as a slow poison to Elio's kind. He was pale, his movements growing sluggish, yet he refused to let go of Clarice's hand. "You're fading," Clarice whispered, her amber eyes scanning the darkness behind them. The distant, rhythmic thrum of the Fae horses was getting louder, vibrating through the subterranean walls. "The iron. It's hurting you, isn't it?" "It is a small price," Elio rasped, forcing a smile that didn't reach his weary eyes. "In my world, everything is beautiful but static. Here, everything is decaying but it pulses with a life I never knew existed. You are the heartbeat of that life, Clarice." Clarice felt a flush creep up her neck that had nothing to do with the humid tunnel air. "Don't do that," she muttered, though she squeezed his hand tighter. "Don't talk like I'm some miracle. I'm just a girl who was about to lose her shop. I'm not a sunbringer. I'm a liability." "You are the morning," Elio insisted, stopping for a moment to lean against a damp pillar. "And the night is jealous." Suddenly, the tunnel ahead of them began to warp. The straight lines of the tracks twisted like scorched ribbons, and the concrete walls bled into a forest of gnarled black trees. They hadn't moved, but the Fae realm was bleeding into the human world, a glamour so powerful it was rewriting reality. Standing amidst the spectral trees was a figure draped in rags woven from spider silk and silver wire. His eyes were mismatched, one a milky white, the other a piercing emerald. This was the Weaver, known in the mortal world as Silas Miller, a man who had lived in the cracks of New York City for centuries. "The prince and the protégé," the Weaver cackled, his voice sounding like dry leaves skittering over pavement. "You bring a heavy scent with you, boy. It smells like revolution and jasmine." "Weaver," Elio said, bowing his head slightly. "We need the shroud. The king's hunt is minutes behind us." The Weaver turned his milky eye toward Clarice. "The shroud is not a garment, little prince. It is a sacrifice. To hide a sun, one must embrace the shadow. Are you ready to lose the very thing that makes you special, girl?" Clarice stepped forward. "If it stops them from hurting my grandmother, if it stops them from killing Elio, do it. Take the glow. Take the scent. I just want to be invisible." "Clarice, wait," Elio cautioned, but the Weaver was already moving. He pulled a spindle from his rags, a spindle carved from the bone of a forgotten god. He began to pace around Clarice, drawing invisible threads from the air. As he spun, the golden aura surrounding Clarice began to dim. The jasmine scent that had been a roar in Elio's senses faded to a whisper. But as the magic worked, a new tension arose. Without the glow of her power, Clarice looked smaller, more vulnerable. And Elio felt a sudden, sharp pang of loss. The bond that had pulled him across the veil was being muffled, and for a terrifying second he felt truly alone in a foreign world. "There," the weaver whispered. "You are now as dull as any other mortal. But beware, the shroud is a thin veil. If you use your power, if you feel too much, the threads will snap and you will burn brighter than before." "Thank you," Clarice said, her voice sounding hollow. "Don't thank me yet," the weaver grinned, revealing teeth of polished flint. "The hunt doesn't just track by scent. They track by the ripples you leave in the WD. And you, Prince Elio, have left a wake like a sinking galleon." Before they could move, a red-hot arrow hissed through the air, thudding into the weaver's shoulder. He vanished in a puff of silver smoke, leaving Elio and Clarice alone in the warped tunnel. From the shadows emerged a figure Elio recognized with a sink in his gut. It wasn't Caliph. It was his younger brother, Prince Julian Corleone. Julian was everything Elio was not: cold, calculating, and utterly loyal to their father's tyranny. "Brother," Julian said, knocking another arrow. "You always did have a nose for trouble." "Father's disappointed. He wanted you to lead the vanguard, not sleep with the enemy." "She is not the enemy, Julian," Elio said, stepping in front of Clarice, his hand hovering over his empty scabbard. "She is the truth of our bloodline. Look at her. Can't you feel the stagnation of our world? We are dying in our golden cages." "I feel nothing but the duty I owe the crown," Julian snapped. He looked at Clarice, his eyes narrowing. "So this is the little spark. She looks like a common street rat now. The shroud was a clever touch, but I can still hear her heart. It's too loud. It's too human." Julian released the arrow. It wasn't aimed at Elio. It was aimed at Clarice's heart. Time seemed to dilate. Elio moved, but the iron in his system made him a fraction of a second too slow. Clarice, acting on instinct, reached out to catch the projectile. The moment her fingers touched the Fae-fired arrow, the weaver's shroud disintegrated. The golden light erupted with a violent, agonizing scream. The arrow didn't just stop. It turned into a swarm of golden butterflies that dissipated into the darkness. The surge of power knocked Julian back, but it did something worse to Clarice. She fell to her knees, her eyes rolling back, her skin burning with an internal fire that seemed to be consuming her. "It's too much," she shrieked. "Elio, make it stop. It hurts." Elio rushed to her, ignoring the way her skin scorched his palms. He pulled her into his arms, pressing his forehead against hers. "Listen to my voice, Clarice. Don't fight the light, let it flow through you. You aren't a vessel, you are the source." In the distance, the horns of the hunt sounded again, closer now, right at the tunnel entrance. Julian scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of shock and newfound greed. He saw now what the king saw, not a threat to be destroyed but a battery to be harvested. "She's magnificent," Julian whispered, his loyalty wavering as he realized the power he could claim for himself. "Forget the king. With her I could rewrite the stars." Elio looked at his brother and saw the rot of Ethelgard in its purest form. He looked at Clarice, who was sobbing in his arms, her power flickering like a dying sun. He had to make a choice. If they stayed, Julian would take her. If they fled deeper into the human city, the iron would eventually kill Elio, leaving Clarice defenseless. "I'm sorry," Elio whispered into her ear. "For what?" she gasped. "For what I have to do to save you." He stood up, lifting Clarice in his arms. He looked at Julian, his silver eyes burning with a cold, terrifying light. "You want the sun, brother? Then come and get it. But remember, the sun doesn't just light the world. It burns everything that dares to touch it." Elio turned and ran, not toward the exit, but toward the deep water pipes of the city's heart. He was leading them into a trap, one that would either break the hunt or destroy them both. The deeper tunnels were a labyrinth of thunder and steam. Elio ran until his lungs felt like they were filled with crushed glass, his boots splashing through the dark, cold runoff of the city's heart. In his arms, Clarice was a fever dream, her body radiating a heat that was beginning to blister his face skin. The shroud was gone, and her scent was no longer a whisper. It was a siren song, a clarion call that echoed through the ley lines of both worlds. He reached a massive circular chamber where the city's primary water mains converged. Giant iron pipes, sweating and vibrating, crisscrossed the ceiling like the veins of a mechanical beast. This was the most human place he could find. A cathedral of industry and iron. Elio, it put me down, Clarice wheezed, her eyes fluttering open. The amber was gone, replaced by a swirling nebula of liquid gold. You're burning. I can feel your skin peeling where I touch you. He set her down gently against a damp brick wall, his hands raw and red. It doesn't matter. We have to find a way to stabilize you. There is no stabilizing a star, brother, a voice dripped from the darkness above. Prince Julian descended from the shadows, landing gracefully on a rusted catwalk. But he wasn't alone. Beside him stood General Caliph, her armor reformed but scarred, and a dozen elite Fae warriors. They surrounded the chamber, their silver blades glowing with a predatory light. You've led her to an iron tomb, Elio, Julian sneered, though he kept a safe distance from the golden heat Clarice was emitting. How poetic. The savior becomes the executioner. I am not her executioner, Elio snarled, drawing his tattered strength. And you will not touch her. Oh, I don't want to touch her, Julian laughed. He looked at Caliph, who nodded and stepped forward, holding a black obsidian sphere. I want to contain her. Do you really think our father sent us here to kill his prize? He's been waiting for her to manifest. He's been feeding her ancestors to the Ethelgard furnace for centuries, but none of them had the purity of this one. Clarice struggled to stand, her hand clutching the brick for support. What do you mean, my ancestors? Caliph spoke, her voice devoid of emotion. You think you were born to human parents, Clarice Sullivan? You were planted, like a seed in a fallow field. Every 100 years, a soul of the Sunbringer is born into the mortal world to hide it from the High Court. And every 100 years we find it, harvest it, and use its essence to keep the Fae realm from turning to ash. Elio froze. What? The Great Veil isn't a wall, Elio, Julian said, his eyes gleaming with a cruel triumph. It's a filter. It pulls the energy from the Sunbringer's lineage. But the filter is clogged. The Fae realm is starving. We don't just need her scent anymore. We need her heart. You're lying, Elio roared, lunging at Julian. But Caliph was faster. She swung the obsidian sphere, and a tether of shadow lashed out, wrapping around Elio's throat and slamming him back against a pipe. The iron hissed against his back, and he let out a strangled cry of agony. Elio! Clarice screamed. As she cried out, the golden light within her flared. But this time, it didn't push outward. It pulled inward. The obsidian sphere began to glow, absorbing her radiance. Look at her, Elio, Julian whispered, leaning over the catwalk. Look at your destiny. She isn't a woman. She's a battery. And do you want to know the best part? Our mother didn't hide her to save her. She hid her to ripen her. The scent you followed? It wasn't a call to love. It was the smell of a fruit ready for the picking. The world tilted for Elio. The betrayal wasn't just his father's. It was his mother's. The locket he carried, the memories of the dawn. It was all a map to a slaughterhouse. He looked at Clarice, who was being drained of her light, her face turning a deathly translucent gray. No. Elio gasped, the iron heat behind him and the shadow tether at his throat crushing his will. No, she's real. I felt it. You felt a biological lure, brother, Julian mocked. You're just a hound who found the fox. Clarice looked at Elio through the haze of the energy being ripped from her soul. She saw the heartbreak in his eyes, the realization that his entire rebellion might have been a pre-programmed trap. But she also saw the violet shimmer of his blood on the floor. He had bled for her. He had crossed a world for her. Elio, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the obsidian sphere. It's not a trap. She reached deep into the void where her power was being stolen. She didn't fight the sphere. He fed it. She poured every ounce of her fear, her anger, and her strange, budding love for the Fae Prince who had ruined his life for her into the connection. If I'm a battery, Clarice hissed, her amber eyes returning with a fierce, terrifying intensity, then I'm going to overload you. The obsidian sphere didn't just glow, it cracked. A high-pitched whine filled the chamber, shattering the glass of the overhead lights. Julian's smug expression vanished. Caliph tried to drop the sphere, but it was fused to her hand by the sheer intensity of the output. Stop her! Julian screamed. She'll kill us all. Let it burn. Elio yelled, finding a sudden, desperate strength. He kicked off the iron pipe, the pain fueling his movement, and tackled Julian off the catwalk. The two brothers tumbled into the dark water below just as the sphere detonated. The explosion wasn't fire. It was pure, unadulterated truth. A shockwave of memories and light swept through the chamber, showing the Fae warriors the reality of their dying world. The hollowed-out souls, the stolen sons, and the faces of the women who had been sacrificed before Clarice. When the light faded, the chamber was silent. Caliph lay unconscious, her armor blackened. The Fae warriors had fled into the shadows, their spirits broken by what they had seen. Elio dragged himself out of the water, coughing and shaking. He looked for Clarice. She was standing in the center of the room, but she was different. The gold was no longer a wild fire. It was a steady, rhythmic glow that pulsed in time with her breathing. She looked at the obsidian shards on the floor and then at Elio. "Was it real?" he asked, his voice trembling. "The pull? The scent? Was it just a lure?" Clarice walked to him, her footsteps light on the wet concrete. She reached out and touched his face. Her skin was warm, not burning, just warm. "I don't know about the magic, Elio. I don't know about the prophecies or my ancestors. But when you held me in that tunnel, when you said I was the morning, I felt like I existed for the first time." She leaned in, her forehead resting against his. "The scent didn't bring you to a queen. It brought you to me. And I'm not going back into a cage." But as they shared that moment of shared vulnerability, the water in the chamber began to swirl. The drain at the center of the room didn't just take the water. It began to pull the very air. From the vortex emerged a figure that made the previous terror look like a dream. King Oberon Corleone stepped into the mortal realm. He didn't need armor. He didn't need a spear. He was the void itself, his presence so cold it turned the steam in the room to falling snow. "My son," the king said, his voice a low, vibrating hum that made Elio's teeth ache. "You have played your part well. You have brought the Sunbringer to the point of total awakening. Now step aside. The harvest begins tonight." The stakes were no longer just their lives. The king was here in person, and he didn't just want Clarice's heart. He wanted to consume the link between worlds, ending the human race to save his own. The presence of King Oberon was not merely a physical threat. It was a metaphysical weight that seemed to flatten the very oxygen in the room. Under his gaze, the iron pipes of the human world groaned and bent, as if the inanimate objects were trying to bow to a dark divinity. Elio tried to stand, but his legs gave way. The iron poison in his blood, coupled with the king's aura, felt like liquid lead pouring through his veins. "Father, stop," Elio gasped, his fingers clawing at the wet concrete. "You are destroying the balance you swore to protect." "The balance was a lie I told to keep the masses quiet, Elio," Oberon said, stepping over the unconscious form of General Caliph as if she were a piece of discarded trash. He didn't look at his son. His eyes, voids of absolute blackness, were fixed on Clarice. "There is no balance. There is only the eater and the eaten. For eons, our people have starved on the scraps of the Sunbringer's line. No more. Tonight I take the source, and Ethelgard will burn with a light that never fades." Oberon raised a hand, and the shadows in the chamber didn't just move, they solidified into obsidian chains. Before Clarice could summon a spark of her gold, the chains lashed out, binding her wrists, her ankles, and her throat. She was yanked off her feet, suspended in the air like a broken marionette. "Clarice!" Elio screamed. He lunged forward, but the king simply flicked a finger, and a wave of force sent Elio crashing into the brick wall. The impact was followed by a sickening crack, and Elio slumped to the ground, his vision swimming in a sea of violet-tinted black. "Do not move, boy," Oberon commanded. "You have served your purpose. You were the hound that brought the prey to bay. Be grateful I do not execute you for your treason. You will watch as I ascend, and then you will return to your cage." Clarice struggled against the chains, her skin sizzling as the shadow metal bit into her flesh. "You're a monster," she spat, her voice raspy from the collar tightening around her neck. "You're killing your own world. You're killing him." "I am saving my world," Oberon countered, walking toward her with agonizing slowness. "And Elio is a prince. He will learn to live with the silence once I have drained you of the noise that is your soul." The king reached into the air, and a blade of pure, solidified void appeared in his hand. It didn't reflect the light, it devoured it. This will be quick, Sunbringer. A final breath of jasmine, and then eternal starlight for the Fae. Elio watched through a blur of pain. He was broken. His magic was gone, his body was failing, and the woman he had crossed worlds for was seconds away from becoming a husk. He looked at the tattered locket he still held in his hand, the gift from a mother who had supposedly betrayed them both. But as the king raised the void blade, Elio noticed something. The locket wasn't just obsidian. In the presence of the king's absolute darkness, a tiny pinpoint of light began to glow from the center of the locket. It wasn't Fae magic. It wasn't the Sunbringer's gold. It was something else, a silver thread of pure, unadulterated hope. She didn't hide her to ripen her, Elio realized, a sudden sharp clarity piercing his despair. She hid her to protect the one thing the king could never control, the choice. Clarice. Elio roared, his voice tearing through the oppressive silence of the king's aura. The scent. It wasn't for me. It was for you. Remember who you are. Oberon paused, his blade inches from Clarice's chest. He turned his head slightly, a sneer curling his lip. She is nothing but a vessel, Elio. She is a mortal shell for a Fae's stolen fire. No, Elio said, dragging himself upward, his eyes burning with a silver fire that defied the king's darkness. She is the daughter of the rain and the sun. She is the bridge. Clarice, don't fight the darkness. Let it in. It's the only way to break the circle. Clarice looked at Elio, and in that moment of absolute hopelessness she understood. The king was the void and she was the light. They were two halves of a cycle that had been broken by greed. She stopped struggling. She let her body go limp in the obsidian chains. What are you doing? Oberon demanded, his brow furrowing. Scream. Fight. The harvest requires the friction of your fear. I'm not afraid of you anymore, Clarice whispered. She looked the king in his void eyes. You're just a hungry old man who's forgotten how to feel the sun. She closed her eyes and instead of pushing her power outward to attack, she reached into her own heart and pulled the king's darkness toward her. The reaction was instantaneous. The obsidian chains didn't just break. They dissolved into her skin. The void blade in Oberon's hand shattered. The king let out a sound that wasn't a scream, but a hollow, echoing groan as his very essence began to bleed into the girl he had tried to harvest. What is this? Oberon gasped, his form flickering like a dying candle. What are you doing? I'm taking back the stolen years, Clarice said, her voice sounding like 1,000 echoing bells. But the effort was too much. The vacuum created by the king's receding power began to tear at the chamber. The iron pipes exploded, drenching them in freezing water and scalding steam. The ceiling began to collapse. Oberon, seeing his immortality slipping away, lunged one last time, not with magic, but with his bare hands, aiming to tear the heart from Clarice's chest. No. Elio threw himself between them, his broken body a final shield. The king's hand plunged into Elio's chest. Silence fell. The water stopped flowing. The steam hung in the air like a shroud. Clarice's eyes went wide as she watched Elio's silver blood spray across the white-hot gold of her skin. Elio. She breathed, the world around them starting to dissolve into a gray, featureless mist. The king pulled back, his face a mask of horror. He hadn't just struck his son. He had struck the only heir to the Ethelgard throne. The line of the Corleones was severed. The void began to consume Oberon from the inside out, his body turning to ash in the freezing water. As the king vanished into nothingness, the chamber gave way completely. Clarice caught Elio as they plummeted into the dark, churning depths of the city's flooded arteries. Everything went black. The scent of jasmine was gone. The heat was gone. There was only the cold, the dark, and the crushing weight of a world that had finally, irrevocably broken. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the weight of everything unsaid. In the crushing blackness of the underground ruins, Clarice Sullivan felt the world slipping away. The water was a freezing shroud, and the weight of Elio's limp body in her arms was the only thing keeping her tethered to the concept of existence. She kicked toward what she hoped was the surface, her lungs screaming, her vision a kaleidoscope of fading embers. They broke the surface in a forgotten maintenance pocket, a small bubble of air trapped beneath a collapsed concrete slab. Clarice dragged Elio onto a narrow ledge of rusted iron and stone. He was terrifyingly still. The wound in his chest, The place where his own father's hand had pierced his heart wasn't bleeding violet anymore. It was gray. The iron of the city, the treachery of his bloodline, and the sacrifice he had made were finally claiming him. Elio, Clarisse sobbed, her voice echoing hollowly against the wet stone. She pressed her hands to his chest, but there was no heat. You can't do this. You didn't come all this way just to leave me in the dark. Wake up. She looked at the obsidian locket still clutched in his cold fingers. The pinpoint of silver light within it was pulse-thin, fading with every second. The turning point wasn't a grand battle. It was the realization that the magic of the Fae and the magic of the Sunbringer were both incomplete. One was a cold hunger, the other a burning flame. Neither could survive alone. You said I was the morning, she whispered, tears carving tracks through the soot and gold dust on her cheeks. But the morning needs the sky to hold it. She didn't try to use her power this time. She didn't try to blast the darkness or command the light. Instead, she leaned down and pressed her lips to the wound over his heart. She gave up the one thing she had fought to keep, her own life force. She poured the golden essence of the Sunbringer not into a weapon, but into the void within him. The silver light in the locket flared. Suddenly, the maintenance pocket was flooded with a soft, iridescent glow. It wasn't the harsh gold of the sun or the cold violet of the Fae. It was the color of twilight, the bridge between worlds. The locket shattered, and from its shards rose the spirit of a woman with hair like spun starlight. Mother! Elio's voice was a ghost of a sound, his eyes flickering open. The apparition of the queen didn't speak with words, but with a feeling that washed over them both. She had been the one to hide the Sunbringer's spark within a human bloodline, but she had also hidden a piece of the Fae's true heart within her son. The scent wasn't a lure for a harvest. It was a homing beacon for a reunion. The gray in Elio's wound began to turn a vibrant, healthy indigo. The iron poison didn't disappear. It transformed, bonding with the gold from Clarisse to create something new, a strength that was neither purely Fae nor purely mortal. Elio gasped, his hand flying up to catch Clarisse's. His grip was no longer weak. It was a vice. Clarisse. The light. It's different. It's ours, she said, a fierce smile breaking through her exhaustion. Above them, the sound of the city had changed. The unnatural purple thunder was gone, replaced by a soft, rhythmic humming. The Fae host was still there, but they weren't hunting. They were waiting. Without Oberon's shadow, the soldiers of Ethelgard were lost, waking up from a nightmare that had lasted centuries. We have to go back, Elio said, standing up with a newfound grace. He looked at the hole in the ceiling where the sky should be. Not to the cage. To the throne. The veil is falling, Clarisse. If we don't stabilize the transition, both worlds will tear each other apart. I'm not a queen, Elio, she reminded him, though her hands were still glowing with that new twilight radiance. No, he said, pulling her close, his heart beating a steady, powerful rhythm against her palm. You are the sun. And I am the sky that will protect you. Together we are the new law. Clarisse looked at the dark water, then up at the faint glimmer of streetlights above. She thought of her grandmother, her shop, and the life she thought she wanted. Then she looked at the Fae Prince who had died and been reborn for her. Then let's go show them what the dawn really looks like, she said. If you're still with us at this turning point, I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think Elio and Clarisse can truly unite two worlds that have been at war for so long? Let me know in the comments if you believe in their destiny. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. The climax is just around the corner, and you won't want to miss how this ends. With a surge of combined magic, they didn't climb out of the hole, they rose. The debris and iron that had pinned them down melted away, turning into a staircase of solidified light. As they emerged into the streets of New York, the people stopped. The cars went silent. Standing in the middle of Times Square was the remnants of the Fae host, led by a hesitant Prince Julian and a wounded General Caliph. They saw Elio not as a traitor but as a king. And they saw Clarisse not as a battery but as the source of their salvation. The final confrontation wasn't with a monster, but with the fear of change. The heart of New York City had become a cathedral of impossible geometry. In Times Square, the towering digital billboards flickered and died, replaced by shimmering reflections of the Ethelgard spires. The air hummed with a tension so thick it tasted of ozone and ancient honey. Thousands of humans stood frozen, their phones capturing a reality that defied every law of physics they knew. Prince Julian stood at the center of the intersection, his silver armor tarnished, his face a mask of desperation. Behind him, the remaining Fae warriors gripped their weapons, but their eyes were no longer filled with the fire of the hunt. They were filled with the hollow exhaustion of a people who had realized they were fighting for a ghost. "You think you can just walk out of the depths and claim the crown?" Julian shouted, his voice cracking as Elio and Clarice ascended the stairs of light. "The king is dead, but the void he left is screaming. Look at the sky, Elio. The veil isn't just falling, it's collapsing. If you don't use her power to seal it now, the Ethelgard will bleed out into this iron desert and vanish." Elio stepped onto the asphalt, his hand firmly locked in Clarice's. He didn't look like the tattered fugitive who had fled the alleyway hours ago. His wounds had healed into shimmering indigo scars, and his eyes held the weight of a ruler who had seen the bottom of the world and survived. "The veil should fall, Julian," Elio said, his voice carrying without effort to every corner of the square. "It was never a shield. It was a tourniquet. We have been suffocating ourselves to stay pure, while the human world grew blind to the magic that belongs to them. I will not seal it. I will open it. You'll kill us all." Julian lunged, not with an arrow this time, but with a dagger forged from the last shard of the king's obsidian throne. He wasn't fighting for the realm anymore. He was fighting for the only world he understood, one of masters and slaves. Clarice didn't wait for Elio to defend her. She stepped forward, her amber eyes blazing with the unified twilight power they had discovered in the dark. She didn't strike Julian. Instead, she reached out and caught the obsidian blade with her bare hand. The dark metal didn't shatter this time. It thawed. The black stone turned to clear glass, then to liquid and finally to a spray of jasmine petals that caught the New York wind. Julian tumbled forward, falling to his knees as the weapon evaporated in his grasp. The shock of the transformation ripples through the host. "The harvest is over," Clarice said, her voice resonant and calm. She looked at General Caliph, who stood watching with a hand pressed to her scarred side. "There is enough light for everyone, but only if you stop trying to steal it." Suddenly, the bruisey purple clouds above the city began to swirl into a massive, terrifying vortex. The death of King Oberon had left a vacuum in the WRD, and the raw, unchanneled energy of the Fae realm was pouring through the breach like a dam break. The skyscrapers began to vibrate, glass windows shattering in a rain of diamonds. "The breach is too wide," Caliph yelled, drawing her sword. "It's a mana storm. It will level the city." "Clarice now," Elio cried. They ran to the center of the red steps in Times Square, the highest point in the immediate clearing. They didn't stand as two separate beings. They stood as a bridge. Elio took the brunt of the iron-heavy reality of the city, grounding the energy, while Clarice channeled the infinite gold of her spirit. They reached out, their free hands pointing toward the swirling vortex in the sky. The climax wasn't a clash of steel but a symphony of will. Clarice felt the weight of every sunbringer who had come before her, the fear of the girls who had been harvested, the loneliness of her grandmother's long watch, and the yearning of a world that had forgotten how to dream. He poured it all into the breach. Beside her, Elio was a pillar of salt and indigo, filtering the chaotic magic of his people through the lens of his sacrifice. He showed the Ethelgard that the human world wasn't a wasteland to be drained, but a garden that had been denied its sun. A pillar of iridescent twilight erupted from them, stabbing upward into the heart of the vortex. The violet clouds met the golden beam and began to change. The bruise faded into a soft dawnlit rose. The screaming wind turned into a gentle breeze that smelled of rain-slicked earth and crushed jasmine. As the energy stabilized, the veil didn't disappear. It settled. It became a mist that draped over the city, a permanent bridge that allowed the magic to flow back into the earth and the iron to lose its sting for the Fae. The transformation was absolute. In that moment, every human in New York felt a sudden, inexplicable sense of wonder. The broken parts of Clarice's life, the feeling of being a freak, the isolation, melted away as she realized she was finally home in both worlds at once. Julian looked up at the sky, his face wet with tears. For the first time in his life, he wasn't looking at a map of a kingdom to be conquered. He was looking at the dawn. Elio turned to Clarice, his silver hair glowing in the new light. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The bond between them was no longer a scent or a prophecy. It was a lived reality. He leaned in, and amidst the ruins of a broken law and the birth of a new era, he kissed her. The crowd below erupted. It wasn't just a cheer for a victory. It was the sound of a world waking up. General Calith sheathed her sword and knelt. One by one the elite Fae warriors followed suit, their silver armor reflecting the sunrise. "The king is dead," Calith whispered, her voice thick with an emotion she hadn't felt in centuries. "Long live the bridge." The days that followed the Great Convergence were unlike any in human or Fae history. The mist that had settled over New York didn't fade. It became a permanent, shimmering layer of the atmosphere, a soft pearlescence that made the sunsets over the Hudson River look like paintings from a forgotten era. Magic didn't overwhelm the world. It integrated. The scent of jasmine and rain became the city's new signature, a constant reminder that the walls between the ordinary and the extraordinary had finally crumbled. At the corner of the Lower East Side, the alchemist's hearth was no longer a dusty relic of the past. It had been rebuilt not with cold glass and steel, but with living wood that seemed to grow directly out of the pavement, its leaves tipped with silver. Inside, Eleanor Higgins sat in a chair carved from Fae oak, her clouded eyes now clear and bright, watching as a new generation of both humans and Fae came to learn the balance of the elements. Clarice Sullivan stood behind the counter, but she wasn't just a shopkeeper anymore. She was the living heartbeat of the new world. The golden glow no longer flared in moments of fear. It resided within her as a steady, warm companion. She had found a way to use her power to heal the iron burns of the Fae who chose to stay in the human realm, while teaching humans how to see the enchantments hidden in their own backyards. The door chimes, now made of enchanted crystal, tinkled softly. Elio Corleone stepped inside. He had traded his regal tunics for a dark linen shirt and sturdy boots, looking every bit like a man who had finally found his footing in the world he once feared. He carried a small bouquet of flowers that didn't exist in any human botany book, petals that changed color based on the mood of the person holding them. "You're late," Clarice teased, mirroring the words her grandmother had said on the night they met. Elio smiled, a genuine, easy expression that reached his silver eyes. The Council of the Nine Spires took longer than expected. Julian is still arguing that the Fae should have exclusive rights to the starlight energy, but Calith is keeping him in check. "He'll learn," Clarice said, walking around the counter to meet him. "Everyone is learning." Elio reached out, his hand finding hers. The contact was no longer a shock of electricity or a burning weight. It was a homecoming. "The Ethelgard is blooming again, Clarice. For the first time in 3,000 years, new sun. Trees are sprouting in the northern wastes. Your light didn't just save us here, it reached across the stars." "We did that," she corrected gently, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I couldn't have carried that light without you to ground me." They walked to the large bay window looking out at the bustling street. In the park across the way, Fae children played alongside human toddlers, their laughter a harmonious chord that echoed through the jasmine-scented air. The forbidden law was a memory, replaced by a treaty of the heart. "What now?" Clarice asked, looking up at him. Elio turned to her, his gaze intense and full of a love that had been forged in the darkest hour and tempered in the fires of a new dawn. "Now we live. We don't run, we don't hide, and we don't harvest. We simply exist together." He pulled a small silver ring from his pocket, not a crown, but a simple band etched with the image of a rising sun and a crescent moon. He slipped it onto her finger, a promise of a future that was no longer dictated by prophecy but by choice. "I followed a scent across the veil because I was starving for something I couldn't name," Elio whispered, his lips brushing against her forehead. "I thought I was looking for a queen. I'm so glad I found you instead." Clarice smiled, her amber eyes reflecting the soft twilight of the shop. "And I thought I was a girl who broke everything she touched. Thank you for showing me I was just waiting for the right thing to hold." As the sun began to set, casting long golden-violet shadows across the floor of the alchemist's hearth, the two of them stood in the doorway, a prince of the night and a daughter of the sun, finally at peace in a world that was big enough for both. Thank you all so much for joining us on this incredible journey from the frozen halls of Ethelgard to the glowing streets of New York. It has been an absolute joy to share this emotional ride with you. If you loved seeing Elio and Clarice find their victory and their love, please let me know your favorite part in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a moment of the magic we're creating here. Until next time, keep looking for the dawn in your own world. The end.